every once in a while, I'll see somebody out there, like on Twitter, social media, YouTube, trying to elicit a response or reaction from the community, making the claim that emulation is piracy. And I just laugh at that. I think that's the most ridiculous statement ever. And a lot of times it's just to get a reaction. Like, who the heck really believes that? I mean, if you believe it, fine. I'm not going to argue with you. But there's a line in the sand. On one side is emulation, the other side is piracy. And they're two separate things. How can one equal the other when there's tons of companies out there who utilize emulation to their benefit and profit off of it in a legal sense? Every Nintendo Switch Online retro game is emulated. Did anybody think that Nintendo is reprogramming Super Nintendo games and having the Switch run it? Or do you just realize, hey, there's actually emulation software behind that just running a ROM like we already do on our PCs, Raspberry Pis, Misters, whatever. Yeah, every compilation that's come out of retro games, the Atari 50th anniversary collection, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection, the Mega Man collections of years past, the Sonic collections, Genesis collections, they're all ran by emulation. They're not like reprogramming these damn games for the most part. There's a few exceptions to that, but most of it is emulation. It benefits those companies, benefits the consumers, benefits everybody. In my eyes, you could have a different thought here, but in my eyes, emulation is perfectly fine for things that are old. Like, I don't emulate Nintendo Switch games because Switch is, and it's a current console. It's in its lifespan. Once it's out of its lifespan, to each their own, do what you want. I have no issue with it. I don't have any issue with anybody doing that now. It's just my personal stance. If it's current, I'm not going to emulate it or anything. But you got to look at that stuff like that with Nintendo. Nintendo attacks emulation. Nintendo attacks people trying to hack their Switch and run software without buying it or emulate Switch games. It makes sense. It makes sense that they would, try to put a stop to that in my eyes. But they also have been notorious trying to stop people from emulating their older games. NES all the way up to like Wii U, right? They've tried to stop that kind of stuff. And they've been, successful taking down some websites, maybe like ROM hacks, little games that people have made based off of their franchises, stuff like that. They've been successful to a degree, but all that stuff is out there. All of us are still playing those games through emulation without giving Nintendo an extra cent. Has Nintendo gone out of business, or have they been one of the most profitable companies out there? Yeah, they've been crazy, profitable. They're not losing any money by me emulating Super Mario World on my PC or Mario Galaxy. They don't give anything. None of these companies give you anything. But, at times they will have access available to some retro games. Through the Switch Online service, maybe, like the 3D, Mario 3D All-Stars selling compilations like that. And people buy these things. People buy them because they want it on that system. Whatever. People emulate it, like the Mario 3D All-Stars, I'm pretty sure was a very successful release. Did they not sell as many because people were emulating those games already? I have my doubts. I bought the damn game, right? I mean, and I've emulated all those games plenty of times. So I think those effects of emulating not really hurting a lot of these companies. Where I see piracy, which, like I said, there's a line in the sand. Emulation's one thing. It's a way of preserving access to games of years past. There's so many we've talked about delisted games just getting removed from, eShops, and there were only digital releases, things like that, and they're no longer available. And maybe somebody wants access to it, stuff like that. Like, if something's delisted and you go and download it and play it, who's that hurting, right? But then the other side of it is, I've always heard this, and reading through documentation, if you buy a game, you don't own the game. It's like when you buy a movie, Blu-ray, DVD, whatever, even a VHS tape back in the day. You didn't own that. You just had the license to use it, right? Like, you just own the physical materials that the media was on. That was it. You didn't actually own anything contained within that. Video games, movies, music. You don't actually own it. And nowadays, it's gotten even crazier with that because access can just be like cut in an instant to a lot of these things. So what's the only way to be able to continue playing some of this stuff or having access is emulating. Piracy, I've seen studies, some with some, margin of error. An old one I saw about the European Union, there was a study saying that piracy doesn't hurt game sales, it may actually help. And I believe in that study, they were essentially talking about people illegally downloading like current games and then becoming paid users once they found that they liked the game or that there was like DLC or, certain offers, that kind of thing. And I don't think everybody who illegally downloads a current game can be converted into a paid user, but there's definitely some. I think piracy as far as current games can hurt certain developers. Nintendo, for example, there's a lot of people out there. I'm always seeing people downloading Switch games or showing Switch games being ran on PC or, downloading, whatever and playing it on their hacked Switch. Nintendo's still been very successful, but where I could see this being a problem is maybe for a smaller developer, an indie developer. Like I said, this is piracy, not emulation. But people, like, say 10% of people who have the game bought it, then 90% downloaded it and never gave the little indie developer any money at all. Yeah, that can hurt. And that's where my stance is like current release games. I don't do that. I'll buy them if I'm interested. It's the stuff from years past that you go buy a Super Nintendo game on eBay or Mercari or even on my little online community marketplace, Madlittlepixel Market, shameless self-promotion. You go on there, buy a game from somebody, and does Nintendo, like, say you bought Super Mario World, a legit Super Nintendo cartridge, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time cartridge for the 64. Is Nintendo benefiting from that? No, they're not from the sale anyway. Maybe from the access to the game and maybe somebody getting the game and being like, oh my God, like I loved playing this back in the day. Now I remember why I loved it. I wonder, maybe they haven't played some games in a long time. Maybe now they're like, it does convert to a new sale. You play the old Mario and you haven't played games lately, or, you're just somebody who doesn't really play games. Maybe you're like, let me see what Nintendo's up to. I just bought this game on the Madlittlepixel Market. Let me go check out what the Nintendo's doing and buy an actual Switch and what. I think it's just benefits them in that way, but monetarily, the sale of it doesn't. So that, like what I just said, the nostalgia and maybe leading to people being like, ooh, what's Nintendo doing? The same thing could happen from that person, instead of buying that cartridge, downloading the ROM and downloading an emulator and playing it, right? Like no harm, no foul. However you look at it and think is fine, but I just always, I see this emulation is piracy argument quite often, and I find it ridiculous. Like, you don't own the game to begin with, even if you bought it, and if you emulate it now, if it's an old game, it's not hurting anything. It really doesn't. And, people who have created emulators are perfectly legal. Doesn't make any sense that people say otherwise. But man, bless these people. Because there's a historical significance to a lot of these games. And I'm always one who's like, the preservation of games. I don't really care, like, how some people are like, oh, it's for history. No, it's for access, which does, go into history. Like, the access is what's important. Being able to still play these games that are historically significant is freaking awesome, dude. I seriously think without emulation, we wouldn't be where we're at today. Look at the Nintendo Switch leading up to the Switch. I really think Nintendo was onto something, releasing the NES Classic Edition, which is an emulation box. And then emulation just kind of blew up at that time. And then the Switch became crazy successful. Why? Because emulation kept Nintendo's name in your mouth and in your brain. Nintendo was smart with that, and I think the same results happen when we're going back and playing these companies' old games. Just makes sense to me. Emulation is not piracy. Piracy is a whole separate thing. And yeah, curious to hear what you guys got to say. Thanks for watching. Bye.